Priya set her phone down on the white tablecloth, face up, right between the champagne flutes, and said, "I think you should look at this before he makes a toast." I remember the ice in my glass had already melted into thin slivers, and the string quartet was tuning up 2 tables away, and I remember thinking, quite calmly, that whatever was on that screen was about to end an engagement party that hadn't even reached its main course. My name is Renata Cole. I'm 38. I've been a structural engineer for 12 years, and the year all of this happened, I was 3 months away from being named lead on a pedestrian bridge retrofit that the city had been trying to fund for a decade. I mention the job not because it matters to the story in some dramatic way, but because it's the thing that kept me steady when everything else in my life was quietly falling apart. The math didn't lie to me, and the math didn't leave. Daniel and I were married for 9 years. We'd met at a mutual friend's barbecue when I was 26, and for a long time. We were the kind of ordinary, happy that doesn't make for interesting stories. He sold commercial insurance. He liked golf he wasn't very good at. He remembered my coffee order. Oat milk, 1 pump of vanilla, extra hot. Down to the exact minute I'd want it handed to me on a Sunday morning. In our 7th year, for our anniversary, we went to Lisbon. I still have the photo from that trip on my phone. The 2 of us on a tiled staircase near the Alfama district. Him with his arms slung over my shoulder. Both of us sunburned and laughing at something I don't remember anymore. I loved that photo. I loved it right up until the night Priya showed me a different one from the same week. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It rarely does. It started, as these things usually start, with small, reasonable-sounding requests. Daniel began working later. Then he began traveling more for client dinners that used to be handled over email. Then there were nights he'd come home and go straight to the shower before saying hello, which I noted, and then talked myself out of noting. The way you do when you've built a life with someone, and the alternative explanation is too expensive to consider. I covered more of our expenses that year because his commissions were inconsistent, he said. I picked up the mortgage twice when his check was late. I told myself this was what partnership looked like. Flexible, generous, unbothered by who paid what in a given month. I didn't yet understand that generosity without reciprocity has a name, and the name is exploitation, just dressed up in a nicer outfit. He left in October, on a Tuesday, with an umbrella-shaped stain of guilt he never fully admitted to. He told me he'd reconnected with someone from his old office, a woman named Vanessa, and that it had just happened after we'd already been drifting for a while. I remember standing in our kitchen, coffee going cold in my hand, and asking him one question. "How long is a while?" He said, "Ren, does it matter now?" I didn't answer him. I let the silence sit there, thick and unmoving, until he shifted his weight and looked away first. That silence was the only answer he was going to get from me that night, and it told him more than any accusation could have. The divorce took 11 months. I hired a lawyer named Audley Marsh, a woman with a voice like a closing door, who told me on our first meeting, "You don't have to be angry in front of him. You just have to be accurate." I held on to that sentence for the better part of a year. I was accurate about the house, accurate about the retirement accounts, accurate about the dog, who stayed with me because Daniel's new apartment didn't allow pets weighing over 25 pounds, which felt, in a petty and satisfying way, like the universe handing me a small verdict. I heard about Vanessa the way you hear about most things after a divorce. Secondhand. Filtered through people who mean well but can't help themselves. She was younger than me by 6 years, worked in marketing, and according to my friend Priya, who still had a work connection to Daniel's old office, she was sweet, a little naive, completely convinced Daniel hung the moon. I didn't think much of it at the time. People are allowed to fall in love with whoever they fall in love with, even the version of a person that's been carefully edited for their benefit. I had my own life to rebuild. I moved into a smaller house 11 minutes from the office. Painted the guest room a color called Sage Whisper that I picked entirely on my own. And started running again for the first time since college. Slow and unglamorous, 3 mornings a week before the heat came in. 17 months after the divorce was finalized, Daniel got engaged. I found out through Priya, who found out through a mutual acquaintance, who'd seen the ring on Vanessa's Instagram. I felt something when I heard, but it wasn't grief, not exactly. It was more like watching weather move across a city you used to live in. I sent Priya a single text back, good for them. I meant it, mostly. The engagement party was in June, at a rooftop venue downtown, and I want to be honest about why I went. Priya was invited as a plus, one by a colleague, and she asked me to come with her, half as moral support, half, I think, out of curiosity about how I'd handle being in a room with both of them. I almost said no. I said yes because I'd decided, somewhere in that 11-month divorce process, that I wasn't going to organize my life around avoiding Daniel Cole. That felt like its own small victory, long before Priya set her phone down on the tablecloth. The party was pleasant enough. In the detached way these things are, when you've already grieved the relationship years earlier. Vanessa came over to introduce herself at one point, bright and a little nervous, and said, "I've heard so much about you. Daniel says you two are still friendly, which honestly means a lot to me." I told her that was kind of her to say, and I meant that too. She seemed genuinely warm. I remember thinking, watching her walk away, that I hoped whatever she was building with him was built on steadier ground than what I'd had. It was an hour later, after the toasts had started and before the main course, that Priya leaned over and said she needed to show me something, and put her phone down between us. It was a photo, old, slightly grainy, clearly pulled from a public social media account. It showed Daniel and a woman at an outdoor cafe table, string lights overhead, a distinctive blue and white tiled wall behind them that I recognized instantly because I had stood in front of that exact wall myself. It was Lisbon. It was taken during the week of our 7th anniversary trip. And the woman sitting across from him, laughing at something on his phone, angled toward him in the unmistakable, unguarded way people sit when they already know each other well, was Vanessa. I asked Priya where she'd found it. She said a coworker had shown her months ago, not thinking anything of it. Just an old photo from Vanessa's account tagged with a location, posted the same week Daniel had told me he was networking at a supplier conference 2 neighborhoods away from our hotel. Priya had sat on it, unsure whether to say anything, until she saw the engagement announcement and felt like I deserved to know. Before I found out some other way, at some worse moment, I looked at the timestamp again. Our anniversary trip, not after we were drifting, not after some vague, undefined, while I was buying him a hand-carved cork keychain from a market stall because he said he collected them. While I was, by his own account later, still someone he loved. I didn't confront him at the party. I want to be clear about that, because I think the version of this story people expect is the one where I stand up mid-toast and throw a drink. That's not what happened, and it's not who I am. I finished my glass of water, thanked the hosts, and left 20 minutes later with Priya, who kept glancing at me like she expected me to combust in the car. I didn't. I felt, if anything, strangely still. The way you feel after a long, held question finally gets an answer, even an ugly one. I called Daniel 3 days later, not to accuse him, but because I wanted to hear what he'd say when I simply told him what I knew. He picked up on the second ring, warm, unsuspecting. I said, "I saw a photo from Lisbon. You and Vanessa, at a cafe, the week of our anniversary trip." There was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "Ren, that was nothing. We knew each other from before. It was a coincidence we were both in the city." I said, "The photo is dated the same day you told me you had a supplier dinner." Another pause, longer this time. "You're really doing this now?" After everything's already settled, what do you want from me? I told him I didn't want anything from him. I said, I just wanted to know if you'd tell me the truth if I gave you the chance. He didn't. He kept explaining, kept reshaping the story in real time. The way people do when they're not actually answering the question, just managing the fallout. I let him talk until he ran out of things to say, and then I told him, evenly, I hope you tell Vanessa the truth. She deserves better than what I got. Then I hung up, and I didn't call again. I debated for a long time whether to tell Vanessa myself. In the end, I didn't have to. Priya, who by then had decided she wasn't interested in protecting Daniel's version of events any longer, sent Vanessa the same photo, with a short, kind message. I don't know you well, but I think you should ask Daniel about this before the wedding, not after. What Vanessa did with that information was hers to decide, and I made a point of staying out of it entirely. That was the quiet, decisive part of all this. Not a scene, not a confrontation, just a boundary I set for myself. I would tell the truth when directly asked, and otherwise I would let other people's choices belong to them. What I heard afterward came in pieces, the way most consequences do. The engagement stalled, then quietly dissolved over the following 2 months. Vanessa, I was told, had confronted Daniel with the photo and gotten the same shifting, unconvincing explanations I had. Whatever trust she'd built her relationship on didn't survive contact with the truth. Daniel, without someone managing his finances the way I once quietly had, without someone covering a late mortgage payment, just this once, started showing the kind of financial strain that had always existed underneath our marriage, but had been invisible to him because I'd absorbed it. A mutual friend mentioned, almost as an aside, that he'd moved into a smaller apartment that fall. I didn't feel triumphant hearing it. I felt, mostly, like a woman watching a structure that had never been properly loaded, bearing finally show the cracks it always had. My own life, in that same stretch of time, kept getting quieter and better in ways that had nothing to do with him. The bridge retrofit I'd been working toward became official. I stood at a podium in October in front of the city council and presented the final structural plan. Something I'd built with my own hands and 12 years of training, something no one could take credit for but me. I kept running, slower some mornings, faster on others, until it stopped being a coping mechanism and just became mine. I started seeing someone new the following spring, a soft-spoken man named Julian who teaches high school physics and has never once, in the 2 years since, made me feel like generosity was a debt he was collecting on. When he asks what I need, he actually waits for the answer. I think about that photo from Lisbon sometimes, not with anger anymore, but almost with gratitude, strange as that sounds. It gave me something a slow, ambiguous unraveling never could have, certainty. It turned out that what I'd spent years quietly excusing as drifting, as inconsistency, as a rough patch, had actually been a decision made in real time, on a trip I remembered as one of the happiest weeks of my life. Knowing that didn't destroy me. It freed me from having to keep guessing. If there's one thing I'd want someone listening to this to take with them, it's that the truth doesn't need your help to survive. It will surface eventually, usually at the exact moment someone stops protecting the lie. Your job was never to expose it. Your job is just to be ready to walk away with your dignity intact when it finally does. I built my whole life back around one quiet decision, that I would rather stand alone in the truth than stay comfortable inside someone else's carefully edited version of me. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear which part hit hardest. And if you've ever found your own version of that photo from Lisbon, you're not alone in this, not even a little.